Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, if you have not been following the news lately, or you simply are not a fan of the everyday fanfare of mainstream news, worry not, because I have a story to tell you. Libs of TikTok, which is quite an eminent Twitter account, which is known for documenting the musings of typically left-wing educators and talkers on the platform TikTok, was recently, for lack of a better word, doxed by the Washington Post, particularly Washington Post reporter Taylor Lorenz, in pursuit of her story to expose, in her words, the hate-mongering woman behind Libs of TikTok. In a story titled Meet the Woman Behind Libs of TikTok, Secretly Feeling the Right's Outrage, Taylor Lorenz argues that this account is responsible for an uptick in anti-LGBTQ legislation and sentiment. I shall read from the article right now to certify this assertion. Lorenz says, and I quote, "The anonymous account's impact is deep and far-reaching. Its content is amplified by high-profile media figures, politicians, and right-wing influencers. Its tweets reach millions, with influence spreading far beyond its 648,000 Twitter followers. I must mention, ever since this story has been out, Libs is now close to 1 million Twitter followers. Strides in effect in action." Libs of TikTok has become an agenda setter in right-wing online discourse, and the content it surfaces shows a direct correlation with the recent push in legislation and rhetoric directly targeting the LGBTQ plus community. Now, when you frame an assertion like this is no longer about a abstract principle or a sense of or a sense of correctness on the part of the reporter. This is rather a defensive mechanism. This is about now defending those who have been targeted. When you use the word target, that has a very nefarious quality to it, which then incites a kind of moral duty upon the fact of the journalist and upon those who feel particularly conscious about this topic. And of course, that kind of framing can dictate how one sees the situation, and it can destroy one's ability to objectively see the situation. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what was the justification for this? And of course, left-wing scribes have run immense apologia for this action, because Lorenz has been rather criticized, because for those of you who don't know, Libs of TikTok did not have a woman who was public about running it. The woman who ran it wanted to do it behind, closed doors, because, this is a very, very turbulent world where people are oftentimes targeted for their political beliefs. And the Washington Post decided to just go ahead and expose that information. So, Jahan Jones, who wrote for the Readout blog, which is not a place you go for intellectual stimulation, or any kind of other stimulation except the stimulation of indoctrination, said essentially that this move was justified. The doxing of Libs of TikTok was justified because it, quote, exposes the puppeteer behind Libs of TikTok is an important reminder to anonymous hate mongers that they're not as hidden as they might believe. So once again, we have the phrasing from Lorenz that says you're targeting people. Then you have Jahan Jones, and basically under the sanction, the imprimatur of Joy Reid, saying also you're a hate monger, which therefore means that they can be treated in a certain way that a normal person otherwise would not be able to be treated. This distinction, this framing, becomes very significant in a second. Now, in her pursuit of this hit job, Lorenz messaged a woman who had the same name as the Libs of TikTok manager. And again, I will not say the name of the Libs of TikTok account manager, because I do not believe in continuing the victimization of someone when they've been victimized by someone for doing someone who is doing an unjust action. So I would just refer to them as Libs of TikTok. And so Lorenz asked that person in her pursuit of this hit job, "Is that your account? Please let me know ASAP because you're being implicated as starting a hate crime against LGBTQ people." And of course, a woman bearing the name of the Libs of TikTok account manager has also been harassed and given death threats by various people, kind of showing why the woman behind the account is anonymous. So Lorenz then went on Brian Stelter's Reliable Sources podcast to further justify this absolute moral catastrophe, saying that the newsworthiness of revealing the person, this is from a Fox News article, the newsworthiness of revealing the person behind the Twitter account that yields such power, saying that for all we know that this could have been a foreign actor. Now, of course, the justification being that Lorenz was anonymous, or rather, the manager of the Libs of a TikTok account is anonymous, and since they have such an outsized influence on the discourse, we should know who that person is. Why? Because they could be a foreign actor in the name of Lorenz. My friends, these justifications amount to nothing more than rank moral relativism. What do I mean? Actually, just not more than just moral relativism. It has some numerous problems. Number one is the moral relativism, which I'll explain in a second. But the more easily apprehendable and evident problem that Lorenz's justification of this doxing is it conflates principles with personalities. And this is a conflation that has been happening throughout the duration of human history, ever since human beings have been able to communicate with each other. This sort of conflation between personalities and principles. The principle of nationalism in America first is now under the imprimatur, the moniker of Trumpism, even though these principles existed way before President Trump was even a thought or even a specimen in the womb of his mother. But of course, since we use heuristics in society to associate certain things with certain ideas so we can easily get them, we embrace simplicity for the necessary nuance that it takes for us to understand principles. And this is what Taylor Lorenz and the Washington Post have done to the Libs of TikTok account manager. They have associated them with a broader political movement, political influence, and through that association, they have decided that instead of actually looking at the merits of what they're doing, the merits of the people who Libs of TikTok is exposing, they would much rather commit a ad hominem and look at the person, get tied up in the person behind Libs of TikTok. This is an absolute diversion. The person behind Libs of TikTok is not important to the message being pushed through Libs of TikTok's work. And that message, to be quite frank to you, is simply using a spotlight to shine upon the sentiments of other people. So in all honesty, Libs of TikTok's own work is not about them. It's about the people who publicize their own thoughts to millions on TikTok, having to have that thought further analyzed by people who may be skeptical. This is the intercourse of ideas described throughout the ancient text. This is the foundations of our knowledge to be able to have competing ideas clash against one another. Yet, Lorenz ignores that very, very simple philosophical distinction in her reporting. But let's go back over to the moral relativism now. Moral relativism is essentially this idea that what is right and wrong is entirely dependent on perspective, that it's dependent on cultural perspective, that it's dependent on subjective whim. There is no true right and wrong. In part, a specimen of moral relativism, my friends, is this idea called consequentialism. The idea that we should evaluate a action's morality, if it's right or wrong, on the basis of what effect it produces, as opposed to the principle that underlies the action. And so the moral relativism of Lorenz is actually quite rank here, because the moral relativism of Lorenz says that since this account is producing an outsized political impact, we therefore have the right to know who this person is. Now, the idea falls apart here when you actually look at the universal principles that underlie the relationships between people and society. And for this, we can look at the idea of natural law. So let me ask you guys this question, or let me explain this to you. If you consider the foundations of society, the idea of privacy becomes nothing more than a logical conclusion of of the existence of civilization. Here's what I mean by that. So in society, a society is comprised of human beings, and human beings, as the philosopher Hugo Grotius mentioned, have a tendency to want to cooperate with each other. We have a tendency to want peaceable cooperation. Grotius would go on to further explain in 1625 in his work The Rights of War and Peace that we were born with arms, thus the capacity to wage war and commit aggression, but we were also born with hands, the capacity to create things, to build things. And you have to have both for a society to exist and to be maintained. And you also have to have, in a society, mutual respect which flows from recognizing the value of our humanity. And this is where the idea of privacy comes in. Rights, my friends, are simply things that I have in possession, things that already belong to me by the fact that I am a human being. And justice, following from that principle, simply consists in allowing me to keep what I already have and giving me what I deserve. And what I deserve is anything that I have willingly entered into, whether it be through contract or cooperation. I do not inherently deserve anything that I have not interacted with in some way, shape, or form, or that does not already belong to me by virtue of my existence. Okay, let's try the idea of privacy. If civilization is built around the respect of one's rights, and it's built around keeping and strictness what they may demand, we can easily extrapolate that the right to privacy is simply an extension of one's natural rights, because the right to privacy is ultimately an extension of the right of self-preservation, the right of self-maintenance, and the right of self-maintenance is the basis for human life. If I could not maintain myself and preserve myself, I would not be able to live at all, and thus civilization would become impossible. And so Lorenz, or rather, the lady who's doing Libs of TikTok, who wanted to remain anonymous, is simply revealing information that's already out there. She's not defrauding anyone. She's not exploiting anyone. She's taking information from one platform, shifting it to another, and in the process of doing so, wanting to remain anonymous so that her right to self-preservation is not threatened by nutters who may not have the same value system that is necessary for a society to function. And if my right of self-preservation belongs to me, and rights consist of respecting what in strictness that I may demand, then for the Washington Post to go out, try to investigate Libs of TikTok's identity, and then expose it to the entire world, including exposing her address for a very short period of time before they took it down on their article to save face, then that means they have fundamentally violated the Libs of TikTok manager's natural rights. And it also means that the principle of privacy exceeds any temporal political impact or social influence that the Libs of TikTok account manager might have in the first place. We have just solved two problems, two justifications, with a simple principle that has been the basis of society ever since it came into being. And yet, and Albert J. Nock made this very, very, very important point in this book right here, and yet the journalist, the person who has a single method of analysis, only wants to consider the fact that they have political influence, Libs of TikTok, but doesn't want to consider the context in which that influence exists, civilization, and doesn't want to consider the broader context upon which that influence is built upon, society, and the natural rights, and then does not want to consider the implications of any of that. Because Lorenz's justifications, as I mentioned, are fundamentally feeble. They make no sense on a moral level. And yet, because Libs of TikTok has influence and is supposedly able to influence policy, their rights go out the window. I don't think so. That does not logically follow. That's a non sequitur of the highest and most disgusting degree. But we also have, in this Libs of TikTok story, the question of proximity. Because Lorenz is saying that Libs of TikTok has managed to get anti-LGBTQ legislation passed, and therefore that puts an imperative upon their identity being revealed. Well, there's a problem with this. Number one, Lorenz clearly has an ideologically biased view of the Don't Say Gay bill, which is one of the bills that she mentions as anti-LGBTQ, which does not mention gay folks at all, as many people have explained tirelessly, but in fact, which is to preserve the principle of a child's innocence from the words of those that may inadvertently or advertently seek to risk that innocence. And the fact that that is being considered anti-LGBTQ, again, shows that Lorenz does not want to check her premises or look beyond her own biases, but instead sees that matter as a matter of hate, and then will then see anyone close to that matter as a hate monger. This is what Jahan Jones was saying, essentially, if you follow the logic to the closest extent. And therefore, those people that support the legislation or are close to it must therefore be held to the standard of a hate monger. And that standard is going to be fundamentally different in their consequentialist ethic than you would hold a regular person who is not mongering hate. Once again, when you operate on a line of falsehood that bill is anti-LGBTQ, and then you associate someone with that falsehood, you will ultimately not see them as a human being or as someone worthy of respect, but you will see them as someone guilty, not even by association, but by proximity. Proximity, my friends, and this I talk about this a lot on my Twitter and on my videos. Proximity ethics is going to be the death knell is the death knell of any prudent kind of moral thinking. Because all proximity ethics is let me give you an example. Let's say there's a fire happening in my neighborhood, and I have a gasoline tank, and I have a match, and I'm standing adjacent to the fire. Proximity ethics would say, someone will point at me and say, hey, you have a gasoline tank and a match, you must be the person who lit the fire. When in all reality, I could have just gotten back from starting a controlled bushfire in the forest at the command of the local state conservatory, or I could have just been filling up my car tank. What proximity ethics does is it prioritizes the appearance of something while ignoring its content, and then uses the appearance and the biases that people have about the appearance of something to draw moral conclusions, or I should say immoral conclusions, because ultimately you cannot have any kind of moral conclusion drawn from a set of false premises. You can't have any kind of logical premises drawn from a set of false premises, because false premises will necessarily lead to an illogical and false conclusion. That's what Lorenz is doing by saying, hey, not only do you have influence, but you're associated with these anti-LGBTQ laws, and therefore you've got to be stopped. They're making a statement, a deduction from proximity, which completely and utterly ignores any serious analysis of that which the person is proximal to. Now, some may say this is like guilt by association, because I'm like, no, not necessarily, because association is more of a direct link. Proximity can be you just standing near something, doing nothing with that something, but because you're near that something, you are therefore seen in a way that is bad. And there's one last angle we have to cover before we go. One last angle. Now, the story becomes even more interesting when one realizes just how Lorenz got her information about Libs of TikTok and their identity. It appears as if this was a full contact effort by certain elements funded by the German government. Lorenz collaborated with a project funded by the German government titled Prototype Fund. Prototype Fund. And according to the Post-Millennial, Prototype Fund is an organization that provides financial support to Brown's so-called hate speech tracker. Prototype Fund is a project of the Open Knowledge Foundation, Germany, which is funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And my friend, this is one of the reasons why I think state forays into education almost most certainly should be looked at scrutiny. Because when you talk about education, what you're talking about a practice meant to cultivate our best aspects so we can then translate those aspects not only into skill that can be monetized for work, but also into skill that will allow us to understand the world. But when you have an education institution confining our best aspects to pushing false ideas, like the idea that hate speech actually is a thing and not just an abstraction created by people who want to censor people, then you have a group that is operating under a false label. That is not education. That is political activism. And political activism and education both have their own place. But to conflate the two and treat the two as if they are on the same level, which is what this is what Lorenz is operating under. This is the power she's operating under, is to engage in a falsehood. This is why I don't like it when governments get involved in education. I don't like it when people are like, well, the left are preaching postmodern values in school, therefore we got to preach pro-American values in school. No, allow pro-American values, which I believe are fundamentally good. The values of individualism, of natural rights, of the dignity of the individual, of individual responsibility to the family. Allow those to shine on their own. Do not push them through force, because guess what? He who controls the methods by which that those ideas are enforced and the money behind them is he who controls the message. And I don't trust these people. I don't trust bureaucrats. I don't trust them. So Lorenz is collaborating with an arm of the German government to go after people like the lady who manages Libs of TikTok. I have many questions. Why is another country's efforts influencing another country's society? This was a critique the left had of Russia during the 2016 election. And now I don't see the journalists who are covering this. My friends, not only is this attack on Libs of TikTok an exercise in moral relativism and in proximity ethics, which pose their own dangers to us as people who are trying to have a free and prosperous and moral society, but it also poses a very good question as to the activities and the intentions of foreign governments within the American sphere of influence. My friends, this is not about Libs of TikTok. This is not about if you agree with them or you think they're funny or whatever, or if you think they're a public figure. This is about understanding basic moral principles which allow civilization to exist, not because those principles are convenient to us, but because they are fundamentally true and indicative of a broader universal law. And when we begin ignoring that and doing the kind of rhetorical games that Lorenz is playing, which operate on a single level of analysis and do not actually ask the question why or explore the depths of these very complex issues, that's the moment we lose any justification, any restraint that we have on ourselves when interacting with certain people in reality, in society. Restraint is what preserves a free society, and a lack of restraint is precisely what will jeopardize it. And just because someone says something that you don't like does not mean their rights matter any more or less than yours do. We are dominated by these factionalist appetites to expose people who we disagree with or to frame them in a certain way. But our primary framing mechanism should always be the truth and nothing but the truth, nothing more than that. And this attack on Libs of TikTok is a broader assault on the truth, and the implications of that are disastrous for the civilization. Think on it. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, please support me at patreon.com/officialcwatson, or please go to my PayPal. Drop some money in there, which is going to be officialcwatson@gmail.com, or join my Discord if you want to debate with me or rather talk with me. Debates, oh my gosh, debates. Now please go to my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. And please join my locals, which is christianwatson.locals.com. Every little bit helps me continue to keep going. I love you guys so much, and please, forever and eternally, stay pensive. Bye guys, I love you. Bye.